When Barron Trump walks into an elite restaurant, he expects a quiet evening, but the head chef refuses to serve him. Whispers spread, tension rises, and the entire staff is left stunned. What led to this shocking act of defiance? And how will Barron respond? The truth behind this explosive moment will leave you speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The evening at Le Belle Lumière unfolded like any other, a sanctuary of culinary luxury where crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections across the pristine white tablecloths, and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air. Wealthy patrons, adorned in designer attire, dined on delicacies plated with precision. The atmosphere was a delicate balance of elegance and exclusivity, a place where the world's elite gathered for more than just a meal. They came for the experience. But that experience was about to be shaken. At precisely 8:15 p.m., the sleek glass doors of the restaurant swung open, allowing the crisp night air to slip inside. A momentary hush settled over the room as a tall, strikingly composed young man entered, flanked by two sharply dressed security agents. Barron Trump had arrived. The effect was immediate. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes nearly stumbled, and a group of diners exchanged hurried whispers. A few guests discreetly reached for their phones, ready to capture the unexpected moment. Though barely 17, Barron carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone well accustomed to the weight of scrutiny. He was neither arrogant nor timid, just measured, aware. In the heart of the kitchen, the news spread like wildfire. Julien, the maitre d', rushed in, breathless, his face ashen. "Chef Lucien," he panted, his voice wavering. "He's here." Lucien Moreau, the head chef and revered master of French cuisine, barely looked up from his station. The flames from the stovetop flickered in his dark eyes, his hands skillfully slicing through delicate cuts of filet mignon. He knew exactly who Julien meant. "I know," Lucien muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. The kitchen staff braced themselves for his response, their gazes shifting between one another in anticipation. Gabrielle, the sous chef, cautiously stepped forward. "So, what should we send to his table?" Lucien's knife stilled mid-slice. Slowly he set it down, exhaling through his nose. His jaw tightened, as if his very breath carried the weight of an unspoken storm. "We're not serving him." The words cut through the air like the very blade he had just laid to rest. Silence. A stunned, suffocating silence. Gabriel's brow furrowed in disbelief. "What?" Lucien turned, his expression unreadable. "I said, he will not be served. Not tonight. Not in my restaurant." The weight of his words pressed down on the kitchen like an iron hand. Isabelle, the pastry chef, glanced nervously at her colleagues. "Chef, you can't be serious." "I am." The tension in the room thickened, heavy with something unspoken. Lucien's grip tightened on the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. Outside, the hum of the restaurant continued, oblivious to the war waging inside the kitchen. And just beyond those walls, Barron Trump sat at his reserved table, unaware that a storm was brewing. One that would shake the restaurant, the media, and perhaps even Lucien himself to the core. The tension inside Le Belle Lumière was reaching a fever pitch. In the dining area, Barron Trump sat with the composed posture of someone accustomed to being scrutinized. He had chosen this restaurant not because of its exclusivity, but because of its reputation. An establishment known not only for its masterful cuisine, but for its impeccable service. He hadn't expected to be the center of attention tonight. Yet the hushed whispers of patrons, the stolen glances, and the nervous energy in the room told him that something was amiss. His lead security agent, Connor Tate, leaned in slightly, his tone quiet but firm. "Sir, something's going on in the kitchen. We still haven't received so much as a menu." Barron met his gaze, unruffled. "That's unusual." Connor nodded. "I'll find out what's happening." He stood and approached Julien, the maitre d', who stood stiffly near the restaurant's entrance. His face was tight with unease, and the moment Connor neared, he straightened his jacket, as if preparing for confrontation. "Julian," Connor said, his voice professional but edged with an underlying warning. "It's been 20 minutes. We haven't even received water. What's the holdup?" Julian swallowed hard. He hesitated before saying, "There seems to be an issue with service." Connor narrowed his eyes. "An issue? What kind of issue?" Julian shifted uncomfortably, casting a glance toward the kitchen. "Chef Lucien has refused to prepare anything for Mr. Trump." The words were like a gut punch. Connor's expression darkened, but he kept his voice even. "Excuse me?" Julian exhaled sharply. "It's personal, I think. He won't explain, but he won't cook for him. And if the chef won't cook for a guest..." Connor cut him off. "Then it's a refusal of service." Julian didn't reply, but his silence was an answer in itself. Back at the table, Barron sipped his water, his expression impassive even as the energy around him continued to shift. Other diners were beginning to take notice of the disruption. The murmurs grew louder. At that moment, the restaurant's owner, Marcel Devereaux, arrived, having been summoned in haste. A distinguished man in his 50s, his presence commanded authority, but the apprehension in his eyes was unmistakable. The moment he stepped through the entrance, the head waiter rushed to him, whispering urgently in his ear. Marcel's lips pressed into a hard line before he turned toward the kitchen. Inside, the kitchen was simmering, not with heat from the stove, but with the pressure of an imminent explosion. Gabriel, the sous chef, had been standing frozen since Lucien had made his shocking decree. Isabel, the pastry chef, looked helplessly between her colleagues, and even the dishwashers, usually ignored in moments of tension, had stopped working to listen. "You're refusing to cook for him?" Gabriel finally broke the silence, his voice laced with disbelief. "Lucien, are you out of your mind? This isn't just any guest. This is Barron Trump." Lucien didn't look up from the counter where his hands rested. His knuckles were still white. "I know exactly who it is." "Then why?" "Because I can't," Lucien snapped, his voice sharp and strained. Gabriel shook his head. "Lucien, you can't just decide that. This is a business. This is Marcel's business. If this gets out, we're finished." Lucien exhaled shakily. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes, but there was something else there too, something raw. "It's not political. It's not about him personally. He swallowed, his voice lowering. "I lost my younger brother 3 years ago. He was caught in a protest in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ever since then, I see that name and I can't..." He stopped himself, but his words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. The kitchen staff was stunned into silence. "I'm sorry about your brother," Isabel finally said softly. "But Lucien, this isn't about that. Barron isn't responsible for what happened that day." Lucien turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. "I know," he murmured, "but I can't look at him without seeing everything I lost." Just then, Marcel stormed into the kitchen. His presence was commanding, his glare like steel. "Lucien," he said sharply. Lucien turned slowly. The two men locked eyes. Marcel's voice was low but firm. "Tell me what I just heard isn't true." Lucien hesitated but then straightened his shoulders. "It's true. You're refusing to cook for a paying guest." Lucien held his ground. "I am." Marcel took a slow breath, controlling the anger simmering beneath his polished exterior. "You are putting my restaurant, your career, on the line over something that has nothing to do with this young man?" Lucien flinched but didn't back down. "It has everything to do with me." Marcel's jaw tightened. "I don't care about your personal grievances. I care about this establishment, and I will not allow you to turn it into a political battleground." Lucien's hands clenched. "It's not political. It's personal." Marcel shook his head in disgust. "Personal or not, this is unacceptable." He turned to Gabriel. "Prepare the dishes for Mr. Trump." But before Gabriel could respond, Lucien did something no one expected. He removed his chef's coat and placed it on the counter. If you're going to serve him, you'll do it without me." Gasps rippled through the kitchen. Gabriel's mouth fell open, and Isabel covered hers with a trembling hand. Marcel's face turned to stone. "You walking out?" Lucien nodded, his face unreadable. "I am." Marcel's eyes darkened with something beyond disappointment. "Then don't come back." The weight of those words settled in the air like a final, irreversible decree. Lucien swallowed hard, but didn't argue. He turned and walked out, pushing through the kitchen doors into the alleyway behind the restaurant. The cool night air hit him like a slap, but he didn't stop. Inside, the staff stood frozen. The sound of the kitchen hummed back to life, but the world inside La Belle Lumière had changed forever. Meanwhile, at his table, Barron Trump set his glass down, his eyes flickering with curiosity. He didn't know exactly what had happened behind those closed doors, but he knew one thing. Something was unraveling, and he intended to find out why. A suffocating silence engulfed La Belle Lumière as Lucien, the once revered head chef, disappeared through the back door, leaving his staff paralyzed with disbelief. His defiant exit had stunned the kitchen, but the true impact of his decision was only beginning to unfold. In the dining room, the tension was palpable. Barron Trump sat at his table, his expression unreadable but his mind working rapidly. The air was thick with whispers from other guests, some craning their necks, others pretending not to stare while stealing glances at the young Trump heir. The murmurs were growing louder. A middle-aged couple seated near Barron exchanged hushed words, their eyes flicking in his direction. "Did you hear? The chef refused to cook for him," the woman whispered, her voice trembling with scandalous excitement. The man shook his head in disbelief. "Unbelievable. In all my years, I've never seen something like this." Meanwhile, across the room, a younger man dressed in a sharp navy suit scoffed. "Well, maybe he deserved it. Maybe people are tired of catering to privilege." His date, however, shifted uncomfortably, not entirely convinced. Despite the escalating whispers and thinly veiled stares, Barron remained composed. His father had taught him one lesson above all: never react in anger. Respond with calculation. At that moment, Connor Tate, his lead security agent, returned to the table. "Sir," he said quietly, leaning down. Lucy asked. "The head chef has left the building, walked out. The kitchen staff is scrambling to regain control." Barron raised a brow but showed no other outward reaction. He swirled his water glass absent-mindedly before placing it back down. "And the owner?" Connor gestured subtly toward the restaurant's front, where Marcel Devereaux, the esteemed owner of La Belle Lumière, stood with his arms crossed, his face a storm of frustration and humiliation. Barron exhaled softly before rising from his chair. The room stiffened, every eye turned toward him. Some guests clutched their forks a little tighter, others held their breath. With smooth, measured steps, Barron walked toward the kitchen, his guards flanking him but keeping a respectful distance. The murmurs swelled into a low rumble as people fumbled for their phones, eager to capture whatever was about to unfold. Marcel straightened his posture as Barron approached. The owner was a man who had spent decades crafting an empire of luxury dining. Tonight, however, that empire was teetering. "Mr. Trump," Marcel began, his voice even but weary, "I deeply regret this entire—" Barron held up a hand, cutting him off. "I'd like to speak to him." Marcel blinked. "Lucien?" Barron nodded. Marcel sighed, rubbing his temple before glancing toward the back. "He walked out, son. You won't find him here anymore." Barron's jaw tightened slightly. "Then tell me why. Why would a man who spent years building a name for himself throw it all away in a single night?" Marcel hesitated. The last thing he wanted was to air personal grievances in public, but the world was already watching. And Barron wasn't just another high-profile guest. He was someone who demanded answers. "Eller." After a long pause, Marcel exhaled. "His brother. 3 years ago, there was a protest in the city. Things got out of control. His brother was caught in the chaos. Barron's posture remained steady, but something flickered in his eyes. "He blames my family. He blames the circumstances," Marcel corrected, though there was little difference. "But I'm not excusing him. What he did tonight was unprofessional. It was emotional. And he's going to regret it." Barron studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'd still like to speak with him." Marcel hesitated, but something in Barron's calm yet firm demeanor made him give a small nod. He turned to Julian, the maitre d'. "Find out where he went." Julian didn't hesitate. He disappeared through the side door leading to the back alley. Meanwhile, the restaurant's unease deepened. Social media was already ablaze, with news spreading at the speed of light. One diner had live-streamed the confrontation, and the hashtag #ChefRefusesTrump was trending worldwide. Barron turned back toward his table but didn't sit. Instead, he addressed the guests, not loudly but just enough for his voice to carry. "I didn't come here tonight expecting special treatment," he said, his voice smooth, calm. "I came for a meal like anyone else. But this situation is bigger than me, bigger than a name." The room was utterly silent. Barron's eyes swept the diners, his expression unwavering. "We all carry grief, we all suffer losses, but should we let that pain make us cruel? Should we let it dictate who deserves basic kindness?" A hush fell over the room. Even those who had silently supported Lucien's refusal were now forced to question whether anger should outweigh civility. At that moment, Julian returned, slightly out of breath. "He's still outside," he reported, "sitting in the alley." Barron nodded. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the back door. Connor, always alert, moved to follow, but Barron stopped him with a look. "Alone." Connor frowned. "Sir, I don't think—" "I'll be fine," Barron assured him. Reluctantly, Connor stepped back. The door to the alley creaked open, and Barron stepped out into the cool night air. Lucien sat on a stack of wooden crates, his chef's coat draped over his lap, his head hanging low. He barely reacted as Barron approached, only lifting his gaze slightly. His face was drawn with exhaustion, and something deeper, something hollow. Barron took a step forward. "Chef." Lucien exhaled through his nose. "Come to gloat?" Barron shook his head. "No." Lucien let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Then why are you here?" Barron studied him. "Because I want to understand." Lucien scoffed. "Understand? What's there to understand? You have everything. The world hands you golden keys and people bow when you enter a room. You'll never understand loss." Barron's jaw tensed. "You think I haven't lost anything?" Lucien met his gaze, but this time there was something softer in his expression. "Have you?" Barron's voice was quieter when he spoke. "More than you know." Lucien stared at him for a long moment. Then something inside him cracked, just a little. "My brother's name was Mathieu," Lucien murmured. "He was 16, a kid. He didn't belong at that protest, but he was there, and he died." Barron nodded, his voice gentle. "I'm sorry." Lucien clenched his jaw. "Are you? Because that doesn't change anything." "No," Barron admitted. "It doesn't." He took another step forward. "But holding on to this anger? It won't bring him back either." Lucien swallowed hard. Barron continued. "You refused me service tonight, not because of who I am, but because of what I remind you of. But ask yourself this. Does that make me the villain in your story, or just another person caught in the crossfire of pain?" Lucien said nothing. His fingers curled around his coat. Barron sighed and turned toward the door. "I hope one day you find peace, chef." And with that, he stepped back inside, leaving Lucien alone with nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat and the weight of a decision he wasn't sure he could take back. The night air hung heavy in the alley, a stark contrast to the grandeur inside La Belle Lumière. Lucien remained seated on the crate, the tension in his shoulders betraying the storm raging inside him. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the closed kitchen door, where Barron Trump had just disappeared moments earlier. For the first time in years, Lucien felt something other than bitterness. Doubt. He had expected Barron to retaliate, to lash out in arrogance or demand that the restaurant be shut down. But instead, the young man had shown restraint, wisdom even. And now, the realization of what he had done settled in. He had turned away a guest, not just any guest, but a Trump, the name that had been burned into his grief for years. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere had reached its peak. The guests who had watched the evening's drama unfold were now engaged in hushed debates over whether the chef had been justified in his refusal. At the center of the dining room, Marcel Devereaux, the owner of La Belle Lumière, stood frozen in contemplation. He had built his restaurant into one of the finest establishments in the world, a place where powerful individuals came not only to dine, but to cement relationships, sign deals, and forge connections. This was not just a business, it was a legacy. And now, it was at risk. Marcel had spent the past 20 minutes on the phone with lawyers, PR representatives, and his investors. The social media wildfire was spreading at an uncontrollable rate. Chef Refused Trump had surpassed 1 million mentions, with opinions dividing the internet. Some defended Lucien, hailing his right to take a stand, while others condemned his unprofessionalism, arguing that a restaurant had no place for personal vendettas. Marcel pinched the bridge of his nose and exhaled sharply. "This is a disaster," he muttered. His maitre d', Julien, who had been nervously watching the fallout, hesitated before speaking. "Sir, what do we do?" Marcel sighed. "We salvage what we can." At that moment, the kitchen door swung open and Barron re-entered. All eyes turned to him. The murmurs died down. The young Trump heir moved with a quiet confidence, his expression composed but his mind still churning from his conversation with Lucien. As he approached the main dining area, Marcel met him halfway. "Mr. Trump," Marcel began, his voice laced with regret. "I cannot express how sorry I am for—" Barron held up a hand, silencing him. "There's no need." Marcel blinked in surprise. "No need? But this—" Barron gave a small shake of his head. "I didn't come here to make a spectacle of anything." He glanced around at the guests, who were still hanging on to every moment. "And I won't." Marcel studied him carefully, trying to gauge whether this was an attempt to remain diplomatic or if Barron truly meant what he said. Either way, the young man was proving to be far more composed than anyone had expected. "Let's not escalate this further," Barron continued. "Your chef made a choice. I've spoken with him. I understand his pain, even if I don't agree with his actions." Marcel hesitated. "And what happens now?" Barron shrugged lightly, as if the answer were obvious. "I leave." A wave of disappointment rippled through the restaurant, but Barron wasn't concerned with the audience. He was concerned with Lucien, sitting outside in an alley, haunted by memories that had consumed him. Marcel, however, knew that letting Barron walk away like this would only worsen the situation. The media would feast on it. The restaurant's reputation would plummet. Investors would pull out. He had to fix this. "Mr. Trump," Marcel said carefully, Would you be open to trying a different dish, if another chef prepared it?" Barron arched a brow. "Wouldn't that undermine Lucien's stand?" Marcel hesitated. "Perhaps, but it would show the world that La Belle Lumière stands for hospitality first." Barron thought for a moment. He could see the desperation in the man's eyes. Marcel wasn't a bad man. He was simply a businessman, trying to contain a crisis. Finally, Barron exhaled softly. "All right, but on one condition." "Anything," Marcel said quickly. "I want Lucien to serve it." A heavy silence fell. Marcel's eyes widened slightly. He just walked out." "Then bring him back," Barron said simply. The tension in the room was suffocating. Marcel and Julien exchanged a glance, knowing that convincing Lucien to return would not be easy, but they had no choice. Without another word, Marcel gestured to Julien, who immediately left to find the chef. As the minutes passed, Barron returned to his table. His security detail remained nearby but maintained their distance. The guests continued whispering, their curiosity impossible to contain. Then a hush fell over the room. Lucien had returned. He stood at the entrance of the dining area, his face pale, his posture stiff. The weight of his actions bore down on him like an anvil. Slowly, he walked toward the kitchen. The entire restaurant watched as he disappeared through the swinging doors. Minutes later, the kitchen door opened once more, and this time, Lucien emerged, carrying a single plate. He walked slowly, deliberately. His grip on the plate was tight, his knuckles white. His eyes remained fixed on the dish, avoiding the gazes of every onlooker. When he finally reached Barron's table, he placed the plate down carefully. Silence. Lucien straightened, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, rough with emotion. "This is not a gesture of forgiveness," he said. "I still carry my grief. But," his voice faltered, "I realize now that grief does not give me the right to project my pain onto others." Barron met his gaze, offering a slow nod. "That's all anyone can ask." Lucien hesitated, then stepped back. Barron lifted his fork, taking the first bite. The restaurant held its breath. After a long moment, Barron set down his fork and gave a small, satisfied nod. A wave of applause broke out. Some guests clapped softly, others more enthusiastically. The tension that had gripped the evening seemed to dissolve, replaced by something unexpected. Lucien's chest rose and fell sharply. He still wasn't sure how he felt about this moment. But there was one thing he knew. He had allowed his pain to blind him. And tonight, a 17-year-old had taught him a lesson he hadn't been willing to learn before. Marcel placed a hand on Lucien's shoulder. "It's never too late to grow, mon ami." Lucien swallowed hard but nodded. Barron wiped his mouth with a napkin, then rose from his seat. He extended a hand toward Lucien. A long pause. Then Lucien shook it. The restaurant erupted in cheers. The headlines the next morning were not about division or anger. They were about growth, about forgiveness, about the night a chef and a young Trump heir chose to rise above resentment and meet in the middle. And that, above all, was the true legacy of the night. The applause that filled La Belle Lumière was unlike anything the restaurant had ever experienced before. It was not the polite clapping of high society patrons applauding a perfectly seared steak or a masterfully plated dessert. It was something raw, something real, a sound that carried the weight of emotions that had filled the room all night. At the center of it all stood Barron Trump and Chef Lucien Moreau, two men from vastly different worlds, yet somehow now bound by a moment of mutual understanding. Lucien's grip on Barron's hand was firm, but his eyes betrayed the turmoil within. Even as the cheers continued, he wasn't sure if he had done the right thing. The pain that had consumed him for years still clung to his heart like an iron weight, but for the first time, it wasn't suffocating him. Barron, ever composed, gave the chef a small nod before releasing his hand. Without another word, he turned, signaled to his security detail, and exited the restaurant with the same quiet dignity he had displayed throughout the ordeal. The moment the doors shut behind him, the spell that had enchanted the restaurant broke. Conversations erupted, cameras flashed, and social media influencers scrambled to upload their footage of the historic night. Lucien, still standing in the center of it all, suddenly felt exhausted. Marcel, the owner of La Belle Lumière, placed a hand on Lucien's shoulder, his grip steady. "Mon ami," he said softly, "you have done something remarkable tonight." Lucien let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I don't know if it was remarkable or if it was simply overdue." Marcel chuckled. "Perhaps a bit of both." The maitre d', Julien, hurried over, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Chef, I just spoke with some of our guests. They're calling this one of the most profound evenings they've ever witnessed." Lucien sighed, rubbing his temple. "I suppose that's one way to describe it." Julien hesitated. "And there's something else." Lucien lifted his gaze, waiting. Julien held up his phone. "The restaurant's name is trending worldwide. La Belle Lumière. Chef Lucien, Barron Trump. The story is everywhere. Some are furious with you, others are praising you for your honesty, but the world is watching. Lucien took the phone, scrolling through the endless stream of comments. Some called him a hero, others a disgrace. He saw words like courage and coward thrown around in equal measure. It was strange, surreal even, to see his name dissected by people who had never even tasted his food. Then, he saw something that made his breath catch. A tweet from Barron Trump himself. "Tonight, I saw pain turn into understanding. I saw division take a step toward healing. Thank you, Chef Lucien, for a lesson in honesty and humanity." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made Lucien's throat tighten. He hadn't expected this. He had expected condemnation, anger, or perhaps silence. But this was grace. Julien grinned. "You might have just become the most famous chef in the world overnight." Lucien handed the phone back. "Fame was never what I wanted." Marcel patted his back. "Perhaps not, but tonight you proved that a chef is more than just the dishes he serves. A chef has the power to stir something far greater than appetite." The weight of the evening pressed down on Lucien like a heavy storm cloud. He had spent years believing that the only way to honor his brother's memory was to hold on to his grief like a shield. But tonight, Barron had dismantled that shield with nothing more than patience and understanding. And now Lucien was left with a single question. What now? By the next morning, the world had fully erupted into a debate that extended far beyond La Belle Lumière. News stations ran panel discussions about the ethics of Lucien's decision, some siding with him, others arguing that his actions were a disgrace to the culinary industry. Political commentators took the opportunity to turn the event into yet another talking point in the ever-divisive climate. And through it all, the restaurant was booked solid for the next 3 months. Even the most controversial press was still press after all. Inside the kitchen, Lucien moved through the motions of preparing for another evening of service. But something was different. The staff, usually buzzing with energy and light-hearted banter, was subdued. Marie, one of his pastry chefs, finally spoke up. "Chef," she said hesitantly, "are you all right?" Lucien looked up from his station, surprised. "Why wouldn't I be?" Marie exchanged a glance with Marco, the sous chef. Marco cleared his throat. "Because last night was intense." Lucien smirked dryly. "Intense? He's an understatement." Marie hesitated before adding, "And because we all saw you reading his tweet." Lucien exhaled, setting down his knife. "It was unexpected, I'll admit." Marco folded his arms. "You've spent years avoiding any association with that family. You refused to cook for him, and yet he still had nothing but respect for you." Lucien wiped his hands on a towel, considering his response. "I expected him to react with entitlement, with anger. Instead, he showed me something I didn't think people in his world were capable of. Humility." Marco nodded. "So, what now?" Lucien stared at the simmering pot before him. "Now, I stop letting my past dictate my present." The words tasted foreign, but right. For the first time in years, Lucien felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. That night, when the restaurant opened for service, a familiar face appeared at the door. Barron Trump? Lucien froze, his hands tightening on the edge of the counter. The dining room, which had been filled with hushed conversations and soft music, fell silent. Every eye turned toward Barron as he stepped inside, his posture as relaxed as ever. Julien rushed forward, his voice caught between excitement and nerves. "Mr. Trump, welcome back." Barron nodded politely. "I didn't come to make a scene. I just wanted to speak with Chef Lucien." Lucien swallowed hard. He wiped his hands once more, this time more for his nerves than anything else, and stepped out of the kitchen. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Barron smiled slightly. "I believe I still owe you a proper meal." Lucien let out a slow breath. And then, for the first time in years, he smiled back. He extended his hand toward Barron. "I'll cook for you this time." A murmur spread through the restaurant as Barron shook his hand firmly. The tension that had weighed down on Le Belle Lumiere lifted, replaced by something lighter, something more powerful. Understanding. And as Lucien turned to head back into the kitchen, he finally understood what Marcel had meant. A chef is more than just the dishes he serves. A chef has the power to stir something far greater than appetite. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, Lucien Moreau was ready to cook from the heart again. The atmosphere inside Le Belle Lumiere was unlike any other night. There was an electric tension in the air. Curiosity, intrigue, and a sense that something historic was unfolding. Every table was filled with patrons who had arrived not just for the exquisite cuisine, but to witness an extraordinary moment. The media had taken hold of the story, and everyone was eager to see what would happen next. At the center of it all, Barron Trump sat at a corner table, composed and patient. Unlike the usual high-profile figures that frequented the restaurant, he did not demand special treatment or make a scene. He simply waited. His security detail sat nearby, watchful but relaxed, sensing that whatever was about to happen was no longer a confrontation, it was a moment of resolution. Inside the kitchen, Chef Lucien Moreau stood before his team, his hands resting on the counter as he took a slow, steady breath. His heart pounded in his chest. This was not just about cooking a meal. It was about redemption, about letting go of the years of pain he had carried like a heavy chain around his soul. "Are you sure about this, chef?" Marco, his sous chef, asked carefully. Lucien exhaled. "I am." Marie, the pastry chef, bit her lip before offering a hopeful smile. "Then, let's make this the best meal he's ever had." Lucien's gaze softened. He had spent so long holding on to resentment that he had nearly forgotten the joy that came with creating something beautiful. But tonight he would cook not out of obligation, not out of bitterness, but out of something far deeper. A desire to heal. With a nod, he turned to his team. "Let's get to work." For Barron's meal, Lucien chose something deeply personal. Not the extravagant, high-packed delicacies that the restaurant was famous for, but something simple, something that carried meaning. A dish inspired by his childhood, a dish his mother used to make. A delicate truffle risotto, infused with flavors that told a story of home, of love, of forgiveness. As Lucien plated the dish, his hands were steady. He added the final garnish, then stepped back, staring at it for a long moment. Marco watched him carefully. "Nervous?" Lucien let out a small chuckle. "Not nervous, just aware that this is more than just food." Marco nodded. "Then let's serve it." When the dish was placed before Barron, the entire restaurant went silent. It was as if the entire world had stopped to watch. Lucien stepped out of the kitchen, walking toward the table with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped just in front of Barron, the weight of the past few days pressing down on him like a storm cloud. Barron looked at the plate, then up at Lucien. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Lucien cleared his throat. "This is a dish from my childhood. It's personal." Barron studied him, sensing the significance of the moment. "Then I'm honored to have it." A hush fell over the room as Barron took the first bite. The flavors melted on his tongue, rich, comforting, infused with something beyond just ingredients. He set his fork down, taking a moment to process, then nodded. "This is incredible." Lucien let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Barron wiped his mouth with a napkin, then looked up at Lucien with sincerity. "Thank you." The words were simple, but they held weight. And in that moment, the years of pain, resentment, and unresolved grief that Lucien had carried for so long finally began to lift. There was no applause, no dramatic outburst, just a quiet understanding between two people who, in their own way, had found closure. As Barron finished his meal, Lucien stood there for a moment before speaking again. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "I let my pain blind me to the person in front of me." Barron nodded, his expression calm. "We all carry something, chef. The important thing is what we do with it." Lucien exhaled, feeling something inside him shift. "I hope you'll come back again." Barron smiled. "I'd like that." And with that, the chapter that had begun with anger and division ended in something far more powerful: understanding. As Barron left the restaurant, the world outside buzzed with reporters and flashing cameras, but inside Le Belle Lumière, there was only the quiet hum of a restaurant that had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. And in the kitchen, for the first time in years, Chef Lucien Moreau felt at peace. The night outside Le Belle Lumière was alive with flashing cameras, murmurs of reporters, and the hushed excitement of passers-by. The story had spread like wildfire. Barron Trump, denied service by a renowned chef, had not retaliated with anger or arrogance, but with patience, dignity, and grace. And now, the unexpected had happened. The very chef who had once refused to serve him had stepped forward, not only to cook for him, but to acknowledge his own mistake. Inside the restaurant, the air still buzzed with the weight of what had just unfolded. Guests whispered in awe, their meals momentarily forgotten as they processed what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just about food. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't even about reputation. It was about forgiveness. At his table, Barron took one last sip of water, placing the glass down with a quiet finality. The meal had been exceptional, but more than that, it had been a statement. A silent acknowledgement that the world was watching, and how one reacts to adversity defines their character. Across the room, Chef Lucien Moreau stood near the kitchen doors, watching Barron with unreadable eyes. He had spent years behind the pass, crafting plates that dazzled the elite, perfecting his craft until his name became synonymous with culinary excellence. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he had faced something far greater than a kitchen full of critics. He had faced himself. Barron stood, his towering frame composed as he approached Lucien. For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. "Thank you for the meal," Barron said, his voice steady. Lucien hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you for your patience." The two men regarded each other, the tension that had once existed between them now replaced by something else: mutual respect. Barron studied the chef for a moment, then extended a hand, a final gesture, a bridge over the bitterness of the past few days. Lucien looked down at it, the weight of his own pride pressing against him. He had never imagined that this night would end like this. But as he reached forward and clasped Barron's hand, something inside him settled. It was over. The anger, the guilt, the resistance, it was all over. A small ripple of applause began at one table, then another, until the entire restaurant was clapping. Not for the food, not for the scandal, but for the simple act of letting go. Outside, the cameras flashed as Barron Trump stepped through the doors of Le Belle Lumière, his security detail close behind. Reporters shouted questions, desperate for a statement, but he simply smiled, calm, unshaken, unmoved by the chaos around him. As he climbed into the waiting black SUV, he glanced back once more at the glowing lights of the restaurant. A night to remember, a lesson learned, and a future forever changed. The events at Le Belle Lumière were more than just a dispute over a meal. They revealed the true power of character, humility, and redemption. In a world where conflicts often escalate, Barron Trump showed an uncommon strength. He chose dignity over outrage, patience over retaliation. And in doing so, he not only won over a restaurant, but taught a valuable lesson to all who witnessed the moment. Chef Lucien Moreau, who had let his personal pain cloud his judgment, had a choice: to remain shackled by the past, or to acknowledge his mistake and grow from it. His courage to face his own biases, to apologize and to make things right, was just as inspiring as Barron's unwavering grace. This story is a reminder for all of us. We never truly know what someone else is going through. Prejudices, assumptions, and personal struggles can cloud our vision, but forgiveness, understanding, and self-reflection can break those barriers. Whether in our personal lives, our workplaces, or even in simple daily interactions, the way we treat others defines who we truly are. So, what do you take away from this inspiring moment? Have you ever encountered a situation where patience and understanding led to a better outcome? Let's discuss in the comments. If this story moved you, if it made you rethink the way we handle difficult situations, then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others. The world needs more stories like this, stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the best in humanity. Until next time, stay inspired, stay kind, and always choose grace.